this fundraiser for Ed McGrath. Ed, as many of you know, is one of our state committeemen, but he's a basic all-around good guy in spite of being a state committeeman. And Ed's running for state senate on the other, basically the other side of Natick in Framingham and Ashland. And do you have a piece of Hopkinton or?
All of Hopkinton.
All of Hopkinton. Okay. Oh, so that's you do have a Republican section out there. Okay. And so again, thank you for coming to this this meet and greet and fundraiser for Ed. And Ed, would you like to say a few words?
I would love to. Thank you very
excellent.
much.
Is there a dumb question?
I want to thank Mark and Kim for opening up their home to me, and for all of you coming today. I'm very grateful. For those of you who don't know me, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm an attorney, and my wife Trish and I have lived in Framingham 21 years. We have 2 daughters. And people always ask me, why did you get involved in this race? And it has a lot to do with my background. I've had the good fortune of serving on the Board of Trustees at Framingham State College, the Human Relations Commission in Framingham, and coaching soccer like many of you have done. And what those experiences have taught me is that the people of Massachusetts are desperate and committed to improving their community. And they all work very hard, like each of you, to do it in their own ways. And I have come to the realization that the biggest obstacle we all have in improving our lives here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is our state legislature. And I say that because, as you all know, over the course of the last 25 to 30 years, we've had some success electing Republican governors, fiscal conservatives, some Democrats who are fiscal conservatives. But we haven't had the chance to change the faces up on Beacon Hill who are controlling things. The names have changed, but the philosophy and the people in reality who run things up there have not changed. I'm asked a lot about jobs here in Massachusetts, about ethics, and about education. And those are big issues to every one of us and to everybody else in the Commonwealth. They're what I call the 3 E's. And we have to, as a Commonwealth, figure out how we get job growth coming in Massachusetts again. We forget that even before this most recent recession hit, Massachusetts wasn't creating jobs. Our number of jobs was flat for the 10 years before this recession hit. The unemployment rate stayed low because our population was declining, but we weren't creating new jobs. The first thing we have to do as a Commonwealth to start creating jobs again is to give people confidence in our state government. People won't invest in Massachusetts when they don't know what the tax bill is going to be next year. And they don't know because our legislators have a long history of taxing and spending and ignoring problems as long as they can before they deal with it. There's a big hullabaloo on Beacon Hill. They're all patting themselves on the back about casinos. Well, whether you're for casinos or against casinos, Governor Patrick started this discussion 2 or 3 years ago, and the legislature didn't want to deal with it, so they punted it down the road. They didn't want to deal with the problem, and the problems of unemployment got worse. They don't want to deal with state spending and cut the state budget, so they count on getting $600 million from the federal government that they don't have. They put that in the budget, and when the $600 million falls through, they blame someone else. There is no one in this room who comes up with their family budget by counting on the checks that we're told are in the mail. If we don't have the money in our checking account, we don't plan on spending it. The state government should do the same thing. Now, ethics ties into that, because how can any of us have confidence in state government and what it's going to do when we see pictures on the TV and in the paper of a state senator stuffing cash in a brassiere, and then no state senator says that's wrong and she should go? Not one said that. Would any of you hire someone to cut your grass who you saw stealing? No. But these people had her in positions of leadership, in positions of privilege up there. She was a chair of a committee. And she was chair of a committee even though she had been previously convicted of tax problems, repeatedly found to have violated campaign finance laws, and she still was given positions of honor. That's wrong, and that has to stop. Other state senators, one was accused of chasing women up in Lowell and running away from police. That's on videotape. Nothing was done about him. He was allowed to go to Germany as a state senator and represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, despite the existence of that videotape. That's wrong. Now, my opponent is vice chair of the Ethics Committee and chair of the Economic Development Committee. And with all due respect to her, she's not gotten the job done. In January of 2009, my opponent co-sponsored legislation to give illegal aliens in-state tuition benefits. Now, whether you agree with that position or not, it shows you where her priorities are. More than a year after that, in 2010, they finally came up with what they were calling a jobs creation proposal. I submit to you those kind of priorities are wrong, and that's why we're in the economic mess we're in. Because their first order of business is to give benefits to people who don't have them, in this case illegal aliens, and eventually they get around to job creation. I say that doesn't make sense. And if you agree with me, I'd like to ask for your help. Now, education is another situation where we have to be vigilant. We have to change the people up on Beacon Hill. For a long time, we've been leaders in education and testing. About 1990, Bill Weld and some other conservatives, including conservative Democrats, were able to pass education reform, and MCAS came into being, and some other changes were made. Well, about a month or two ago, despite the fact we're the leader in the country on standardized tests, our governor indicated they're rethinking that, and maybe we're going to agree to a national standard. Well, I think it's wrong for us to go to a national standard when we're leading the nation. We should want to remain the leader of the nation and not go back to the pack. Charter schools is another position where you can see how our legislature will do the politically expedient thing rather than deal with the difficult problem. You might recall that several months ago there was talk of the President's initiative to give money to states in what was called the race to the top. The federal government sent out some standards. If a state met these standards, you'd be considered to receive some money. Massachusetts was in the running for, I think it was $250 million. One of the problems Massachusetts had was the cap on charter schools we have here in Massachusetts. Our legislature, rather than removing the cap on charter schools, decided, well, we'll remove the cap on the lowest 10% of the performing schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So there's still a cap, but it's not as strict a cap as it once was. Unfortunately, we didn't win the race to the top. We still have children in underperforming schools who are trapped there because of a cap on charter schools. And we're supposed to accept that as reform. That's not reform. That's kicking the can down the road, trying to avoid the problem. They talk a lot about transportation reform. Well, at transportation reform, Governor Romney tried to do it, it wasn't accepted. Finally, they got around to doing it. They combined the Mass Turnpike Authority with the Highway Department, and we were supposed to accept that. Well, I'm still paying my tolls when I go into Boston. There was a story in the Herald a few months after the alleged reform was done that the one new agency now had 6 more public relations people making more than $100,000 than the 2 did. And then I almost fell off my chair when I read this in the paper last week. They are now borrowing money to pay the salaries of that agency. The number they're borrowing escapes me. I think it's $1 billion over the next 5 years.